Airbnb is getting more and more popular, and as it does, research is emerging about its impacts on cities. The Huffington Post and The Lens came together to see how Airbnb is impacting New Orleans. They write about their findings in an article titled "How Airbnb is Pushing Locals Out of New Orleans' Coolest Neighborhoods." That article was co-authored by Emily Peck of the Huffington Post and Charles Maldonado of The Lens, and he is here now to discuss its findings. Thank you so much for joining us.
Thanks for having me.
Because, of course, earlier in the show, we had the mayoral candidates on, and I had to ask them about this article because it's all over the internet. You guys did some great work here. For people who haven't read it yet, tell us what you found.
Well, you know, short-term rentals, we use Airbnb as a shorthand, as a lot of people do. But short-term rentals have been legal in the city for a few months since last April, and that's after they had been kind of allowed to proliferate in the city, even though they were illegal for a number of years. And we looked at where they seemed to be having the biggest impact in the city. And we identified about 16 neighborhoods with very high density of Airbnbs. And those are the neighborhoods you might suspect, you know, the mostly historic core neighborhoods close to the river. And in some cases, in the Marigny, for example, what we found based on the licensing data is that 1 in 10 residential addresses are also registered as short-term rentals. And you know, we talked to people who lived in some of these neighborhoods. We spoke to advocates for Airbnb and people who were opposed to Airbnb. And you know, it seems to be having quite an impact on on a fair amount of neighborhoods in the city. Yeah,
and in the article you guys spell out that impact is that it's making neighborhoods richer and whiter faster.
Well, yeah, okay, so you know, obviously what we've seen in terms of demographic shifts in these neighborhoods also happen to be the neighborhoods that have seen the largest demographic shifts from black to white and from poorer to richer in the last 15 years or so. Now, what people who are most concerned about Airbnb will say, what they believe is happening is that Airbnb, though it didn't start this process, it's accelerating the process.
Okay.
And in fact, it's an entirely new kind of, you know, gentrification or demographic shift, whatever word you want to use, in that it's not even replacing poorer people with wealthier people. It's replacing residents altogether with tourists and turning residential districts into hotel districts.
Yeah, definitely a lot of impacts there that a lot of people are worried about in the city. What about positive at all? Because you do hear from some locals who are able to keep their properties despite rising costs because they Airbnb it.
Oh yeah, and that's the other side too, right? We talked to a guy who is Airbnb-ing only the back of his house. He's not one of these whole house renters or anything like that. And you know, he bought his house at a fairly modest price. He lives in one of these neighborhoods that has really seen a shift over the last 15 years. And his house is worth a lot more. His taxes are a lot more than they used to be, making it difficult to afford to stay there. He began Airbnb-ing his property the back of his house a couple of years ago. And this is really, it's freed him up financially. And he's been able to start a business that's since become successful. He now employs 10 people as a result of this, and he puts this all back on his ability to make this extra income through Airbnb.
Yeah.
So we have that side of it as well. On the other hand, you know, we zoned in on a block in Treme where 10 out of the 16 residences are registered Airbnbs with the city, and according to the residents, most of them are operating as full-time Airbnbs. And you know, they've had some negative experiences with, you know, people passed out drunk on the street. You know, we sort of start the article with an anecdote that I'm not going to talk about right here on the air. You have to read the article.
Give them a tease, Charles.
Well, it was involved a bachelorette party that was displaying some inappropriately shaped balloons outside, and this is a block where, you know, kids lived and stuff.
Certainly, and they have to deal with that.
Exactly.
Is there some kind of conclusion you guys got out of this moving forward? Because you guys laid out both sides very well, so it's hard to say short-term rentals are terrible for all locals because that's just not true, or that they're good for all locals because that's not true either.
Well, yeah, it's hard to say. I mean, I think that one thing going forward is that maybe the city it might be advisable to just to look at the law that we passed, and the amount and the fact that the law is fairly loose. It makes it fairly easy to do this, and I think what we found in the article makes me wonder if it's wise, not necessarily to change the law, but just to take a second look about whether that was the right thing to do.
Okay, certainly. Well, some great work here. I've shared this with a million people, so thanks so much for joining us tonight to talk about it. Guys, for more on Charles' article and to read it yourself, again, it's titled How Airbnb is Pushing Locals from New Orleans' Coolest Neighborhoods. You can visit thelensnola.org and follow Charles on Twitter at @CMaldonado_Lens. We'll be right back with much more of the 504.